Well, Broadway fans, I am sitting here with one of the busiest directors on Broadway. He is back with his ninth nomination for Tootsie. I'm Sam Eckmann, and this is Scott Ellis. Thanks so much for joining me, Scott, and congratulations on this nomination.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
This is a classic film, obviously, and I'm just curious because musicals take so long to gestate and make it to Broadway. How did you first get your hands on this piece?
They sent it to me, Scott Sanders sent it to me about 3 years ago. And I was I wasn't, to be really honest with you, I wasn't quite sure I was going to do it. I just thought, I'm not sure, this is tricky. And so basically I said, listen, I'll sit down with the writers. And if we all agree of how we're going to approach this, which is basically, we can't put the film on the stage. That was my biggest concern. Like if that's what you're planning to do, I'm not interested. So both David and Robert both said, no, we definitely want to try something different. So once they said that, and I had a breakfast with them and I just really liked them, I thought, this might be a really fun collaboration. So that's
In the cast of Around the World in 80 Days, your Act 1 running time was 1 hour 2 minutes. Your Act 2 running time was 41 minutes. Your next time is 2 p.m.
I'm attached to a theater, so we're talking about Broadway.
I'm walking off. I'm getting a pillow because my thing hurts.
That's okay.
Okay, there. Where are you?
I'm attached to a theater, so I'm getting a Places Call. Sorry, it's the live theater. That's what we're dealing with here.
I love it. So anyway, that's really mainly how it happened, and then I sort of said no a couple of times, but then once we started working, it was a very long process. Musicals take a really long time, and to figure this one out was tricky, but it was a joyous experience, and that's just what we did. We just started looking and seeing what can we do to tell this story in 2019.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that because for those who haven't seen this Broadway version, it is a true adaptation. The original movie was in the world of soap operas. Now we've brought it into the land of Broadway. And so what kind of, was the process for you of pulling that apart and really adapting it for contemporary audiences?
And again, when we talk about this, I will always say it's Robert and David and myself and discussing, but it was how do we how do we embrace and tell this story in 2019, especially with making sure that character in the movie of Julie was not really strong. So we readjusted that immediately, or at least started talking about that. And hello, can you see me?
Hello, there you go.
Yeah. So it was just that was really our main focus, was how do we make these two characters equal? And what are we going to do to make sure that Michael, who's making this really, really bad decision in his life, what's he going to learn from it? I said from the very beginning, which I think freed us up, I kept saying, and that happens to all of us, especially in the business, what you do, what I do, everything. If someone said you could not do what you love to do, acting, being a doctor, anything, how far would you go? And to do what you love. And that's really what we started with, and that's what we held on to for the most part.
Mm-hmm. And I should mention, we're talking about Tootsie, but you also have directed Kiss Me Kate, the revival roundabout this season. So how, you're doing out-of-town tryouts for Tootsie, but also with Kiss Me Kate, how do you manage two massive musicals in one season on Broadway?
I tell you, it was crazy. It was nuts, but actually fun. When Tootsie came to me, I had already agreed to do Kiss Me Kate. So I said, listen, I am in Kiss Me Kate. I've agreed to do it. I'm doing it with Kelly. So if you want me, you got to work around my schedule. So ultimately they did. And we went out of town in Chicago. We came back, and then I started rehearsals in December. And then it was a crossover. Once I started previews in Kiss Me Kate, then I would go to Tootsie in the morning, Kiss Me Kate rehearsals in the afternoon, Kiss Me Kate seeing the show, back to Tootsie, back to notes, and that happened for 2 weeks. That was a little crazy, I have to say. But you know what? In this business, I'm grateful with those two opportunities, and there were two shows I truly loved, and there were two challenging shows, so it was sort of fun to keep all of that going and trying to figure it out.
When you have projects like that overlap, do you find that they ever inform each other or inspire each other in strange ways?
Well, in this situation, it did, only because we were dealing with some of the same questions. I mean, in Kiss Me Kate, you had a famous story about basically a woman being tamed by a man. It was like, well, how do we tell that story, and how do we in Tootsie make that role from a woman's point of view strong? And so, yes, it was interesting. We did ask some of the same questions, and with Kiss Me Kate, I brought in Amanda Green to help with the script, and I wanted to readjust and relook at that all. And I had made some really strong choices of how I wanted to balance those two characters out. And then, as I said, with Tootsie, it was a constant 3 years of conversation of how do we tone in. And that what we started 3 years ago and what we finished off are two totally, that's a different show, so.
Yeah. And, speaking of the woman's perspective, Lily Cooper plays Julie Nichols in this. And really by the end of Tootsie, she kind of almost becomes the protagonist of the piece.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because she was saying the ending is actually, I spoke to her a while ago and she said the ending changed quite considerably. Was that a conscious choice to have her to shift the perspective almost to her as you go?
It did. It was so interesting. I'm now remembering so many things that we switched. I mean, originally we went back to sort of the idea of the movie, and she came back to the theater. He was doing his show, if people know the movie. And again, we tried to get away from the movie as much as possible. All I said with the writers was, listen, we can't put the movie on stage. If we can get them involved with our characters, they'll go with our story. And that was what we sort of stuck with. But yeah, there was, for a long time, she came back, and then it was like, well, wait a minute. Why is she coming back and apologizing? Michael's the one that screwed up. He's the one that has to, she'll be okay. He's the one that says, I've lost a lot here. So we changed it. And then, because it was that original, for people who haven't seen it, the first time they really meet is on a park bench. And I said, let's bring it back to the park bench where they started. Now they're going to come back and they're going to have to restart all over again. But it's going to be on very different terms. And in a sense, it's going to be on her terms. She's the one that gives permission to at least take the next step and see what the relationships are going to be. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. But we gave the power, complete power to that character, which I think was absolutely the right thing to do. But that took us a little time to go, well, wait a minute, hold it. This doesn't seem right, so that's how we changed that.
And the other main actor, of course, is Santino Fontana, who really sells that journey. Not only has to kind of sell this, apologetic man by the end and journeying to that place, but is singing in different styles depending on if he's Michael or Dorothy, and has to do all these quick changes. How important was his casting? How did you land on
it? Was I'd have to listen. I've said this before with directing. I think casting is such an important job of what you do, and I did a workshop with Santino at the New York Stage and Film he was adapting or is adapting Aurora the Grease Paint. And I didn't know him. I knew him, but I hadn't worked with him. And we went up there for 2 weeks, and I just had an incredible time with him. And I love that he was challenging me and asking questions. I love that with an actor. I think that's really smart. And so at the end, when I did decide to do Tootsie, I said to the producers, I would not do it without him. If they wanted a big movie star, that's fine. I wasn't interested. Only because I knew the way he was approaching that role up there, that he would approach it the same way here. And he's a great actor, and he could. I knew he could bring believability to both. And Dorothy's a real person. Dorothy is, you have to believe 100%. You got to get on the bandwagon with her. And I just, in my gut, knew that he would be able to do that, which he does.
And all the casting really pops in the show. I mean, every character, down to, a small person who's just maybe handling a few scenes in a subplot, really is distinct. And so I'm curious, what do you look for when you're casting something like for a big comedy like this?
I mean, fortunate enough, I had worked with some of them. So Julie Halston and Reg, I knew some of them, and the rest of them, other than Lily, actually, I had not seen Lily. She came to audition, but the rest of them I had seen, and I asked them to start doing readings for me over the 3-year period. So I had a sense, once I got them in the room, how it was going to affect the piece, or what they were going to do with their these characters. So that's how I did it. They're all funny people, but they're all really good actors. And we then took them and allowed them to be part of this collaboration. And we sort of wrote and readjusted around these actors as they were bringing their ideas in the room. And we would, I mean, they're just great craftsmen of comedy. And comedy, as you know, is really, really hard. It's really hard. And it's hard to do, and it's hard to make work, but it's much easier when you have these type of actors.
Do you have a sort of secret to directing comedy? Because the jokes, I mean, Robert Horn's book just flies fast and furious through this, as he has back lyrics. What is the challenge for you in directing that?
I think the challenge, I mean, it is challenging but it still comes back down to you have to find the truth in it. You can tell a joke and that's fine, and jokes are funny, but I think you really have to find what's the reality of the situation, and from that comes comedy. But the stakes, they always say in comedy, they have to be pretty high, and these stakes are very high for these guys. I mean, for Michael, the stakes are higher than anything. He's not going to ever be able to work. So if you go to each one of those characters, you see where the stakes are. With Lily's character, with Julie's character, all of them have very high stakes. So you work on that first and really find that truth. And then from that, you can explore the situation, which hopefully is funny. But it's only funny if you find the truth and the reality in it.
Mm-hmm. I noticed, looking back in your career, you started actually as a performer, as an actor, and you've been on stage in Grease, and you were in The Rink with Cheetah and Liza.
Yeah.
What was the thing that prompted you to shift over to directing?
I shifted over to directing during The Rink. I approached Candor and Ebb while we were doing the show, saying, "Hey, you wrote a show called Flora the Red Menace, and I think that's a really cool show." And they said, I said, "You should revive it. We've always imagined, who would direct it?" And I said, "Me." And they said, "Have you ever directed?" I said, "No." But they were kind enough or stupid enough, I don't know, to sort of say, "Okay, we'll give you a shot," which they did. I think what it was, to be honest with you, like I said, I love actors and I love working that way. And I had worked with some directors I thought were good, but I had other directors, it wasn't that fun, and I didn't feel it was a collaboration. So I think that's what pulled me over. And to be honest with you, actors don't have a lot of control. They just don't. And sadly, and I'm married to an actor, so I see it constantly. But as a director, you have a little bit more control. And I have to be honest, I like that. I was like, oh, I like being on the other side of the table. But I also never forgot what it was like to be on the other side. And I think that's one thing that I'm so glad I was an actor, because once you go through that, you just don't forget, and you don't forget people who are, who don't treat you well, or you feel like, oh, I wish you would treat me this way as a collaborator. And so all those things hopefully made me a better director, or certainly I was interested enough to explore that, which gave me the reason to ask that question to Candor and Ebb.
And along the way, you've done, new musicals, big revivals, plays. What kind of things do you look for in a piece when you're picking something? What do you respond to that makes you want to get involved?
It's always a little different. I think obviously the piece itself is what you're really looking for. Characters, what's that situation with those characters? I'm driven to that. So everything is different. A lot of times it's just who you're working with. Bradley had approached me. We wanted to work together because we had been friends and did something. And he's the one that suggested Elephant Man. That was not my idea. And so I was like, okay, let's explore that. But that was mainly because of him. So it's a different combination. I'm associate artistic director of the Roundabout Theater. So there are things that Todd will give me that I'll go, oh, that's interesting, or I'd like that. I try desperately to stretch and not repeat myself really hard, and you have successes and failures with that. So I try to do that. And my reasoning is always just a gut instinct. It's just, can be a writer, it can be an actor, it can be the situation. I just try to go with my gut.
Well, you've certainly had a lot of successes, because this is your 9th Tony nomination this year. I'm curious, having gone through this award season and watching the Tonys, being a part of it 8 previous times, how is it different for you now after like experiencing it that first time?
Listen, the truth is the first time is always pretty great. You know, I'll never forget that first time. And it was just like, oh my gosh. I've been fortunate enough that it has continued. I'm just beyond grateful that I get to still do what I truly love. And it's just a reminder. It is that, you know, and but by the way, in many years I'm not nominated. You know, it's not like, oh, I'm only feel successful if I get nominated. It's not that. It's just like you just feel like, oh, that's nice to be recognized for this. And hopefully all it means is that I get to work more. That's really what it boils down to. I think we all in this business, in some sense, feel like this is going to be our last job. And, you know, that's really, I think, what drives us. And so for me, it's just like, oh, maybe someone else will hire me after this. You know? But it's certainly a joy. I think the fun part about it is just seeing other people and people that you know and you love. And it's a constant reminder of me as this little kid watching the Tony Awards going, oh man, I wonder if, when, and then you just get there and you go, oh my gosh, I'm here. I know those people. I've worked with some of those people. So that's always a nice reminder. So it never gets old. I'll tell you that.
Well, we're very excited for you come June 9th. And everyone watching at home, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby to keep up to date with all of our updates throughout Tony season. And thank you so much for joining me.
A total joy, Sam. Thank you for asking me.